In this course, we're going to be looking at blues rock phrasing. There'll be 3 long solos to learn, broken down into dozens of licks that you can incorporate into your own playing. We're going to be working with a variety of grooves and backing tracks, and we're going to be focusing on some core phrasing ideas, such as call and response or question and answer phrasing, leaving space, repetition, building hooks, building a theme. A lot of our ideas are going to essentially be blues based, but regardless of the style of music you play, you can incorporate these into your own playing. Everything is written out in tab and standard notation, and we have 3 downloadable backing tracks to work with. Of course, there will be traditional blues licks, but we're also going to look at some bebop inspired ideas with chromatic approach notes, as well as some slightly outside sounding scales such as the diminished half-whole scale. So if you're ready to improve your phrasing, grab your guitar and I'll see you inside. In this series of lessons, we're going to be looking at blues rock phrasing, more specifically call and response phrasing. Now what I mean by that is if you play a phrase and then the next phrase that you play has something to do with the previous phrase. So it's almost like a question and an answer, sometimes called question and answer, call and response. Not only are we going to learn a load of really great licks that you can incorporate into your own playing, whether it's blues or funk or rock or metal or jazz, but we're going to learn how to phrase musically so that we're not just kind of running up and down the scale, but we're leaving adequate spaces, which are just as important as the notes you play after all. You know, we're kind of relying on things like repetition, you know, so you're kind of playing a phrase and then embellishing it or repeating it. And it's very much the way I play, generally when I'm kind of soloing, whether I'm playing blues or whether I'm playing rock. You know, it's good to develop a habit of really listening to yourself as you play. So if you play a phrase, you know, something you like the sound of, then play it again or play a musical response to it. There are plenty of examples in the solos. Now, I will say early on that whenever you're learning a solo, in particular the 3 solos in this course, it's really important to listen to them a whole bunch of times before you tackle them, just so you kind of know them inside out, in the same way as you would be able to perhaps kind of hum or memorize the sound of the solo to Stairway to Heaven or Comfortably Numb, for example. You know, it's really going to help when you're kind of, when I'm breaking down these solos, that you kind of know where you are. So do keep referencing the original recordings. Now, everything we're going to be learning is going to be in the key of G. We're working actually with static vamps. So what I mean by that is we are playing, we're not playing 12-bar blues. All of our 3 backing tracks, although they're different grooves, they're all based on just one chord, which is a G7, a static G7. Now, static means that it's not moving. There are no chord changes or anything. Even if there are riffs within those backing tracks, it's based on that harmony. So, you know, we're not worrying about changing chords or anything like that. You know, I've made plenty of tutorials on 12-bar blues. But with something like this, we're kind of working more with groupings or kind of bar numbers of, you know, kind of 2-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases, 8-bar phrases, you know, 16-bar solos. So kind of blocks of 4 rather than 12. And this is great because you can apply this to any style of music. So although we're using blues, you know, kind of blues rock as our core template, this is really kind of transferable and applicable to other styles. And I've avoided playing the shuffle rhythm just because, you know, there's a lot of material on that. I have a website called absolutebluesguitar.com, which you can go in and really kind of hone your blues vocabulary, you know, dealing with kind of classic electric blues. But with these grooves, we've got a Bo Diddley groove, a kind of Bo Diddley Sun Clave. We've got a kind of John Lee Hooker boogie, and we've got a funk vamp. And as I say, they're all static. They're all based on a G7 chord. You know, so you can play G Minor Pentatonic throughout. You can play G Major Pentatonic throughout if you so desired. Or you can mix the two. Now, if your fretboard knowledge isn't particularly great, I have a course called Master the Fretboard that takes you from having very little knowledge of the fretboard to being able to visualize any scale, chord, or arpeggio anywhere on the neck. So something like that would be really, really helpful, because you know, we're going to kind of get straight in and look at the licks and look at the kind of phrasing and the usage rather than the core scales. But you know, it'd be really helpful to know the minor pentatonic scale. In this case, it would be G Minor Pentatonic. And if you know all 5 positions of that, then you'll be at an advantage, because we're going to be kind of, you know, playing it all over the fretboard. And to also know the G Major Pentatonic Scale in as many positions as you can. Because we're going to be using blues tonality. And what I mean by that is, well, some people see it as mixing the major and the minor pentatonic scales. I don't really think of it that way, because you can get a slightly disjointed approach that way. You know, you might play a phrase that's kind of overtly major, and then go up 3 frets and go. Play the same thing, you know, but in a minor box, and that can be a little bit kind of disjointed. But the way I like to see it, and on my Master of the Fretboard course I go into more depth with this approach, but the way I like to see it is, and this is the way a lot of blues players kind of generally think, is using the minor pentatonic scale as the core framework and adding the major third. You know, you may have heard that sound before. So we've got a major third there on the 4th fret on the G string, down there on the 2nd fret on the A string, and adding the 6th, the major 6th. There's one there on the 5th fret on the B string. There's one there on the 2nd fret on the D string, and adding the 9th or the 2nd. So there's one here on the 5th fret of the high E string, also on the 5th fret of the low E string, because of course there would be. Same rules apply on both E strings. And what you actually get with that, you get a kind of hybrid scale. If you played it in and of itself, it's not going to sound like music. I mean, that doesn't really sound like the blues. It's kind of how tastefully you kind of, you know, weave these sounds in and of each other. But you do actually get the overlay of the major and the minor pentatonic scales. Because if we think about the intervallic functions that make up the minor pentatonic scale, and if this goes over your head, if any of this goes over your head, don't worry, just learn the licks and have fun with it. And, you know, there's plenty of information on this kind of thing. I've made courses on this kind of thing, but, you know, just to kind of give you a bit of a primer, the intervallic functions that make up the minor pentatonic scale, regardless of the key you're in, are the root, the flat 3 or minor third, the 4th, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, and the flat 7, and then it just repeats: root, flat 3, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, flat 7, root, flat 3. So only 5 notes, you know, penta meaning 5. The intervallic functions that make up the major pentatonic scale are the root, the 2nd or the 9th, the major 3rd, then you've got the perfect 5th, and then the major 6th, and you're back to the root again. And then it repeats. So we're only adding, by overlaying the major pentatonic scale over the minor pentatonic scale, we're only actually adding 3 extra notes. The root note's going to be the same. We've got the major third, and we've got the major sixth and the second. So when you put all that together, you know, if you compare the major and the minor pentatonic scale, the root we've got in common, the fifth we've got in common, you know, so we end up with an overlay of those 2 scales without having to kind of jump up. I don't know if you know that trick where to get a major pentatonic scale, you play the same shapes, but you move down 3 frets, and then, you know, to get a minor pentatonic scale from a major pentatonic scale, you go up 3 frets. You know, it kind of saves us doing that, and we start to kind of see the neck as kind of one big scale. And some people call this the hybrid blues scale or the hybrid pentatonic scale, or some people would call it the mixolydian scale, because essentially you've got a mixolydian scale, but you've got a minor third in there as well. Now this minor third over a dominant chord, dominant 7th chord, you don't want to kind of hang on it too much. You want to always be kind of slightly bending it sharp, teasing it to sound like the major third, or play the minor third and then hammer on to the major third. That will give you that kind of bluesy, kind of sweet and sour kind of sound, you know. You don't want to go the other way around and play major third to minor third. Again, if all this theory is going over your head, don't worry, just have fun with the licks. If we think about the intervallic makeup of a dominant 7th chord, if you know anything about chord theory, you know, playing a G7 chord in any position, it's made up of 4 different notes. Even if you're playing it across 6 strings, there are only 4 different notes. You've got the root, you've got major third, you've got a perfect 5th, and you've got the flat 7. Oh, you know, think of Twist and Shout or Let's Dance by David Bowie, you know, you'll hear that. But when we play the blues, we play over it generally with a minor pentatonic scale, which has a minor third. So that minor third is kind of an outlier there. It doesn't really belong, but because blues has been around for so long, to our ears now, in modern times, it sounds absolutely fine. You know, it sounds kind of acceptable. But it's always nice to kind of send it on its way with a slight, what we would call a blue note or a microtonal bend. A good analogy would be Robert Plant in Black Dog, where he goes, ah, 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 ah. He's not going, ah, ah. He's got that minor third, ah, ah. It's got a slight bend on it. So that will give you the sound. You know, if you know your modes and you know the mixolydian scale, you'll know that you get root, a second, major third, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, major 6th, flat 7, back to the root. It's kind of what we're dealing with here. But we are adding that minor third. You wouldn't play it as a scale, but if we're playing licks, that's the sound. That's the sound of the blues. You know, that's the sound of kind of playing over dominant chords. So kind of mixolydian blues, some people might call it. So the 3 solos contain a lot of licks. Some of them have licks in common, but because we're playing over different grooves, they might kind of sound different. I would advise that you learn the solos note for note if you can, but if you don't, just use the ideas and the licks and the concepts as a kind of springboard, you know, to play over the backing track and think about your phrasing and think about, you know, the meaning of each note, you know, the kind of placement of each note, and you can play a lot more kind of meaningful licks and solos. Now, as I say, we're working with 3 different grooves. We've got a kind of Bo Diddley, Sun Clave kind of Bo Diddley groove, all in the key of G, as are all of these backing tracks, and that will be at, I think, 100 BPM. We're dealing with a kind of funk blues, 3, 4, 1, which I think is 105 BPM, and we're also playing like a John Lee Hooker boogie, which I think is around about 172 BPM. You know, that's a kind of boom boom, you know, kind of John Lee Hooker, or you could think of Lagrange by ZZ Top, you know, or Satch Boogie. You know, there are so many kind of songs that kind of have that sound. So these solos are kind of semi-improvised. What I did, I put the backing tracks on, hit record, played some ideas, and after a couple of takes, it kind of started to bed in what I wanted to play. So when I'm teaching you these licks, I'm actually going back and learning my own solos, because I haven't kind of memorized them. They're not kind of written solos. But of course, I will tab them out. You will have tabbed versions of them. So if I make any mistakes with kind of fret numbers or anything like that in the breakdowns, then the tab is going to be a lot more accurate than kind of trying to recall them from memory. Just bear that in mind, but I'll do my best.